Hi everyone, welcome to my therapeutic space. Today I am going to continue talking about our negative thoughts and focus on some of the tools to challenge them. The last video focused on negative thinking styles, which are helpful to know when challenging our automatic thoughts. So if you missed it, don't forget to check it out. Alright, so negative thinking is learned thinking. We weren't born thinking this way, and we probably learned it watching the people around us growing up. Negative thinking turns into automatic thinking through repetition. By the time we are independent, we become independent enough to do our own thinking, we might have been exposed to numerous examples of negative thinking patterns, and those styles. By then, negative thinking just feels like who we are. Without even questioning it, we automatically assume that we're wrong, we might be a failure, we might be disliked. And of course, there are consequences to these negative thinking styles, these thoughts that we have. If we think that a mistake is a failure, this all or nothing thinking can lead to anxiety. We might worry that any mistake might expose us to criticism, judgment, and then we don't give ourselves permission to relax or let our guards down. And if we're thinking that we're broken or unfixable or unlikable, this negative self-labeling can lead to depression. When you're trapped with your own unrealistic view of yourself, feeling trapped is one of the common causes of depression. So, that being said, in order to have better mental health outcomes, we need to really focus on reducing our negative automatic thoughts and increasing those positive ones through reframing and restructuring them. And as we talked about before, our negative thinking style is natural, it's automatic. It's impossible to completely eliminate it. It won't happen, but what we can do is become more aware of them and recognize when they're happening in the moment. And in those moments, that's when we can change our thoughts and we will have better outcomes. We are going to be able to overweigh those negative thoughts with the positive ones. It's possible. So one way to do this is with cognitive restructuring. This involves interventions in therapy, such as identifying the problematic thoughts that we have, the automatic thoughts, identifying the cognitive distortions we have in those automatic thoughts, like I talked about in the last video, and a rational dispute of these automatic thoughts with Socratic dialogue, which Socratic dialogue is a method of assisting clients in determining how accurate and helpful a certain thought might be, which is done through exploring how the client came to have those thoughts, evaluating the evidence regarding those thoughts and other possible thoughts, and developing a rational rebuttal to that automatic thought. So finding alternatives, finding evidence or facts to challenge these thoughts. So for practical ways to challenge and dispute these negative automatic thinking styles, once we try using what we can try is using some of these worksheets, and they're based off of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. So these worksheets include automatic thoughts and their consequences, characteristics of negative thoughts, and how these thoughts and feelings, how we can work towards changing them. So I will go over one of them and show you. First, I'll show you this one. This is I showed it in my last video actually, a thought record. It's 7-column, so it helps you think about your thinking. It's a basic tool of cognitive behavioral therapy, and what we do here is we use a series of questions, or it's a step-by-step process in identifying your thinking styles and changing it. And a CBT worksheet, it gives you a chance to reflect on the thinking after the fact, when you're not reacting out of fear and anger, so that it's easy to identify the negative thinking. And ideally, you want to get to a place where we can do this in the midst of that moment. But a thought record will help you see that negative thoughts are based on false and untested beliefs. So for example, you might believe that you're a failure because you were told you were a failure growing up. You may believe it might have been reinforced through other people. You might believe it comparing yourself now to other people that might be successful. And that's a classic example of an untested belief. You haven't stopped to challenge that thinking. You haven't learned at an early age how to do so. So these CBT worksheets and thought records can help you find healthier ways of interpreting these facts. You couldn't see these alternative ways before because they disagreed with your childhood beliefs or your beliefs growing up. And you can change your thinking once you realize that you can actually change it and get into the habit of challenging your thinking. You'll be able to do so in the moment more so throughout those experiences that you have. So this is another one too. This is kind of a step-by-step process. So it's a thought record, and it has questions that your therapist can help you go through, or you can actually read it over and journal it yourself. You can put it in a journal, but I'll just try and show you some of them. It's really hard to do this over a video, but we can actually go through this in more detail. I'll explain it. So this sheet here, you can print it off. You can find it online. It basically, again, has questions to guide you through the process of challenging these thoughts. So number one goes through the situation. So you briefly want to describe the situation that led you to the unpleasant feelings that you're having. This will help you remember the situation later if you kind of review it and go back to it in your journal or notes. Number two is the initial thought. So what first crossed your mind? Was it a subconscious or automatic thought that you've had before? Number three, consider the consequences. Why do you want to change this way of thinking? What will be the consequences if you don't change it? Look at the psychological, physical, professional, and relationship consequences that you might have. And this step helps you find your motivation as well in working through those changes. So those 3 steps will help you identify the thought that you need to change, and it will give you motivation and help you with that motivation to make those changes. So number 4 is challenge your initial thought. So how successful has this thinking been for you in the past? What facts do you have to support or challenge this initial thought? What strengths do you have that might have been overlooked? And what advice could you give someone else in this situation? And number 5 is optional, which is negative thinking. So summarize the negative thinking behind your initial thought. So identify some of the styles of negative thinking, like I talked about in my last video, but for example, all or nothing thinking, which focuses on the negatives, or catastrophizing, or negative self-labeling. And this step is optional because after you've done it a few times, the same types of negative thinking styles will come up, so you'll kind of already have that at the back of your mind. So number 6 is also optional, which is background. So when did you first have these initial thoughts? How deep do these roots go? So this is more of a journaling, self-reflection process. How successful has this thinking been for this before? And again, this is optional because after you've done it a few times, the same sources of negative thinking will keep coming up again, and you'll start to see those patterns. So steps 4 to 6 help you see that your negative thinking is not based on facts, but it's driven by false beliefs that you've probably learned over time. So number 7 is alternative thinking. So now that you understand your negative thinking, how can you handle this situation differently? Drop any negative assumptions and think of the possibilities that you might have been overlooking or might have been overlooked. Number 8, positive belief and affirmation. Write down an affirmation in a positive form that reflects your healthier approach. Choose something that you can use as a reminder. Those 2 steps help you come up with healthier ways of thinking and can make them more into an affirmation, so something you can repeat to yourself, use on a regular basis. And number 9, here's an action plan. So what can you do if this situation arises again? Knowing your tendencies, how can you prepare for this situation? And write a list of strengths that you can bring to the situation. What do you do if you fall back on old habits? And number 10 is, do you feel slightly better or optimistic? So this step reinforces the idea that if you change your thinking, you'll change your life, and you'll have a little bit more of an emotional shift when you go through this process. So again, steps 9 and 10 help you incorporate your new thinking into your life. And cognitive behavioral therapy is effective because, like this, it takes you step by step through the process of self-change. And that being said, I know we took a little bit of time in going through that. Again, we have other examples or other worksheets that you can use that work through challenging the thoughts, as well as looking at how do I implement this more as a habit or a regular routine in my life. And the idea really is, after practicing them, after journaling them, finding and understanding these patterns, you start working through those in the instant that the automatic thought actually happens. So you don't have to go back to the drawing board and look at that past thought you had earlier that day. You can begin to do it right in that moment. And that changes the course of your day, changes your mood, changes the outcome. So it's really important that we use these tools in challenging and changing these thoughts. So I hope that was helpful, and I look forward to giving you more information about our thoughts and how they impact our core beliefs. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Bye.